Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm excited to share with you today 10 surprising facts about the French language, many of which have impacted English too. And so I'll be supplying some supporting facts to expand on the information I'm sharing here. And so, since it's a lot, let's get right to it. For one, did you know that French was the official language of England for 3 centuries and it was actually the native language of the King of England, well, of many kings of England over time. And this all started with the Norman conquest in 1066, uh, CE, of course, and this was led by William, Duke of Normandy, also known as William the Conqueror. And so Normandy, if you know today, is still a province in France, and you might recognize it from where, or from storming the beaches in Normandy on D-Day when the US and other allies were coming in to save France from the Nazis, right? So Normandy, so the Duke of that part of France at the time went ahead and claimed the English crown. And so this ended up with several centuries of French being the official language in English and a lot of impact on the English language. And it wasn't just William the Conqueror who was King of England. What they kept doing is um, the new line of royalty in England, aka William the Conqueror and his nobles. Um, they kept bringing in French princesses to remarry to keep the French language and culture alive in France and keep uh, relationship with the affairs of France and all that. And this changed English in a big way because now the King of England was speaking French and we started bringing in a lot of French words into English, which changed, which is why Middle English was so much very different than Anglo-Saxon, which was spoken in England before that. All the French words, and I got 3 examples of those right here. One thing that's somewhat unique about English, is that we don't always use the same word for the meat that we're eating from an animal as the word for the animal itself. Like a lot of times we do have the same word, like if we're eating chicken that came from a chicken, or if we're eating turkey, it from a turkey, and so on. And not just birds, we also have other uh, meats that work like that, like fish. If you're eating trout, this came from the fish that was trout, or tuna, same thing. Now, when it comes to certain meats, in English, we have a word for the animal, like cow, for instance. But the word for the meat we use is beef. That's because the word buff is, well, it's more like a bull in French, but still male cow, less concentrating on the female part of it, but that's the animal, buff. So that's where we get beef in English. Same thing for, what do we call pig in French? Peur, peur, pork. We got that word in from English. That's more or less a French word for pig. And mutton, no, that's like mutton chops, mutton, all of this. The French word for sheep is mouton. And so that's where this came from. So those are just 3 examples of the many words we ended up getting into English, because French was the language of culture and of the state, and most importantly, of the King of England from 1066 until about 1362. So about 300 years there. And the influence that French had in English did not stop there. Um, and these couple pie charts are showing how much English words come from French and Latin. Uh, French provides nearly 30%. Actually, it's more like uh 28, 29%. Yeah, about 29% of the words in English come from French, and an additional 28% or something come from Latin, which brings the two of them together to just over 56% of words, a little over that. And which is weird because English is not a Romance language, so it did not directly evolve from Latin like French and the other Romance languages did. And what's even more interesting than this is that the amount of English words that came from Germanic, and English is a Germanic language, so the number of words that came from Germanic languages is less than the number of words that came from French, and it's also less than the number of words that came from Latin. So, um, and as a result, since French and English were both borrowing a lot of words directly from Latin as well, now French and English share more than half of their day-to-day vocabulary. And so this started about a whole millennium ago, but it has continued on and on and on to the point where we have English just being so chock full of French words. So I already gave you beef, pork, mutton, and some other ones are also less obviously French like that, like aunt, uncle, cousin. Lots of words for extended family members in English come from French. And also we have some that are a little more obviously French, like bon voyage, café, carte blanche, chic, cul-de-sac, right? Encore, déjà vu, facade, film, genre, resume. These are all words that most every English speaker knows, even though they all came from French and they're very much become a part of the English language. And it's so full, gives English speakers a big advantage learning French, because it's not so hard because we can recognize a whole lot of the words used in it. And now, speaking of English and French, and the impact between the two, did you know that French is the most widely taught foreign language in the United Kingdom? Far more taught than anything else. And it's actually also the second most taught language in the US after Spanish, of course, which is becoming more and more of a local language for us in the US, now that Spanish is pretty much um, the second most spoken language in the US. And education is part of it. But still, French is popularly taught in schools here, although schooling in French is on its way down a little bit in the US, which I think it is a shame because French is growing. It's going to be an even larger language than English, spoken by even more people within the next couple of decades. So I think that English speakers, we should really get on top of this before we're left behind. So anyway, yeah, French is widely taught in the UK, in the US, and by the way, it's also taught in pretty much every single other country in the world, and I'll get back to that in a little bit. Um, and speaking of the US, and this is not just schools, now this has to do with people's first language. Did you know that French is the fourth most widely spoken language in the US? Of course, the first is English and the second is Spanish. We're not going to care about mentioning what the third is, because it's not English or French. So French is the fourth language. And on this little map here, you can see some of the states with the highest number of French speakers. Um, I'm talking raw numbers, not per capita, but the highest number of French speakers, California. Texas, Louisiana, Florida, New York. Uh, and also one thing worth noting about French is spoken in the US. Louisiana is the uh, highest concentration of French speakers in the US, and this includes um, colonial French, also known as plantation French, and also Cajun French, Cajun, and also Louisiana Creole. So all that was put together, that gives us the biggest concentration of French speakers in the US. Second biggest concentration is in the Northeast. You have New York and New England, which New England, although the states don't have a population as an overall population as high as New York State does, so the numbers of French speakers are smaller there because the numbers of the total population are smaller there. The numbers of French speakers relative to the total population are pretty big, especially in Maine. Uh, and also Massachusetts has a high number of French speakers in it, as well as Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, and New Hampshire, around all of New England. And some of these are French Canadian French, so descendants from Quebec, from people who came down from Quebec, so Quebecois, and also from the Maritime provinces, so Acadian French. So both of those exist in the Northeast. And so we have Louisiana and the Northeast providing two big strongholds. And other states that are very populous have a lot of French speakers like Texas, California, Florida. So if you're thinking of French as simply a foreign language, not so much. It's also pretty darn local to us in the US too, especially for those of you who live in the Northeast. And now getting back to French being taught in classrooms around the world, French is the second most popular language um, for learning a foreign language in this world after English, of course. And so, by the way, one thing that's worth noting here is that French and English are the only two languages that are taught in every country in the world. And so, again, um, we have Spanish being taught a little more than French in the United States, but still, French is the second most popular language to learn here. And yeah, all over the world, you have people learning to speak a little French just by going to school. And now, speaking of how many people speak French, we have French is an official language in 29 countries altogether. That's a lot. And you can see um, well, these countries on the map are the ones in more, well, darker orange kind of deal. Well, it's brownish orange. It's the color that you see the most of on the map there. And on top of the 29 countries where French is an official language, oh, in a lot of these, French is not the only official language, but it certainly is one. And And these include places all over the world. And on top of that, there's another 45 countries where French is widely spoken, making the total of countries where French is widely spoken all the way at 24 countries. And by the way, 24 countries, that's well over a third of the number of countries in the world. So 195 countries in the world, 74 of them, that means 38% are ones where French is spoken pretty widely. So that's impressive. And this is part of how it's growing. And population growth in some of these countries is going pretty fast. And yeah, so French is spoken in a lot of countries. I bet you in plenty of countries that you might not even heard of, right? So, uh, yeah, and this is actually you don't have a lot of language spoken in so many countries. We have Arabic and English are spoken both in a lot of countries, but but you also have France on that list of uh, the most countries that have, well, languages that are the official language of the most countries possible. That would be French and English and Arabic. Surprisingly, not Spanish. And so let's see what's the fact number 8? French is the 5th most widely spoken language in the world. And I have some supporting facts here. For example, there are more than 320 million speakers of French, and that's not just the native speakers, that includes everybody else. People who learn French a little later on in life, like myself. I didn't speak any French until I was at least 9 years old. Um, and I would be included in one of those groups, people who didn't learn it as a first language, but who do use it every single day in our lives. And worldwide, over 320 million speakers, and this number is growing very fast, fast, fast. It's amazing how hard it is to keep up with how many people speak French now. Every time there's a new census in a French-speaking place, the number ends up going up. And another thing is French is the fastest growing language in the world. Like I said, there's over 320 million speakers of it right now worldwide. By 2050, so 26 years from now, it's predicted that there will be more than double that, around 700 million French speakers in the world. At which point, since English is sort of predicted to shrink a little bit, there will be more French speakers than English speakers in this world. So again, I would encourage English speakers to go ahead and learn a little French, just in case it's going to come in handy when we're outnumbered by the French speakers. And also, French and English are the only two languages that are official languages on every one of the 6 inhabited continents. So that's to say every continent except Antarctica. We don't really count that one as inhabited, even though there are certainly some scientists there who speak English and some who speak French, but that one doesn't really count. Um, but yeah, so it's the 5th most widely spoken language in the world right now, but it was growing so fast that it might get all the way to number 1 within the next couple of decades. That's pretty amazing. And it makes me think that in English we need to stop just assuming that our language will be so useful forever and that we don't need to learn other languages because, oh, we do. Things are changing. So the 9th fact about French is that if you're at all interested in learning another Romance language like Italian or Spanish, Romanian, Portuguese, or there's lots more like Catalan and whatnot, but the best known ones besides French are Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. And learning French gives you a real head start for learning any of those languages because you will recognize a lot of the words in them immediately. And also learning to control the grammatical gender system in French will be super useful because you have to use a similar system in all the other Romance languages. And now if we're talking about someone um whose native language is not another is not French and not English, and they do want to learn English, French would be a really good head start for them too, because like I've already said in this video, more than half of our words in English come from French. And so, yeah, it's a good asset for somebody who wants to learn English as a foreign language, and maybe start out with a little French. Because it's more similar to English than the other Romance languages are, because there's been so much back and forth, borrowing back and forth between the two languages. And finally, uh, surprising fact number 10 about the French language is Although we share a lot of words in French and English that are very similar, we have these things in French that we call faux amis, false friends. These are words that in French, if you look at them, they look a lot like certain words in English, but they really don't mean the same thing as the words in English. I put down a dozen or so, well, 13 actually words in here. And for the record, this only took me a couple minutes to get all these words off the top of my head. So there are so many more. And I'll just give you the first four terms for an example of what I mean. The first term, actuel, does not mean actual, it means current. So be careful of that one when using it in French. Avertissement, the second term there, avertissement, does not mean advertisement. It means warning. So sometimes kind of the opposite of an advertisement. So avertissement, warning. And the word cave, the third one, cave, that doesn't mean cave. It means cellar. Like that's what we, le cave, that's what we would call like the wine cellar, for instance. Uh, so that's cave, which is certainly not the same thing as cave. And finally, the fourth one, I have coin, C-O-I-N, coin, does not mean coin. It means corner or sometimes area. So anyway, I won't go through all the other ones, but what I did want to say is be careful with those. Les faux amis, there are a lot of them. So if you are an English speaker who's learning French, you got to watch out for which words are more or less the same in French and which ones are false friends. These are ones that are going to mislead you because they mean something different than the similar word in English does. And voila. So I figured I would warn you all about those false friends as long as I was encouraging you along this whole video to learn a little French. Figure there are some things to watch out for on your way. And so thank you so much to everybody who watches my videos until the very end. I hope you're going to enjoy knowing some of these fun facts about French. And yeah, I am super happy for everybody who watches my videos until the very end. So thank you so much for that. Again, I appreciate it. Now, please don't forget to give a thumbs up to this video by hitting the like button, make friends with it. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, please do consider subscribing. That would help out my little channel so much. So until next time, see you around. Bye-bye.